for truth.
Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the mysteries of the past, and the uncharted maps of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean.
I saw that reaction.
Yeah, I was like, wait, that's not the word. What did it say before? What did you change
I changed it live.
No way.
I changed it live.
I thought you rewrote it, and that's why you messed up the first time. But I think you messed up the first time because Wyatt started crying, right?
Yeah. So this time I was literally looking at it, and I did it the first time, and I was like,
uncharted realms.
So we say realms not too far before that, and I realized that, and I'm like, let's change it. So
yeah, and if
it said uncharted, so I chose maps of spirituality.
Well, if it's an uncharted map, that's a little oxymoronic. Because a map is a chart.
Not if it's just an outline of an area.
What? Well, what if we did like
we know that spirituality is a thing, but we
frontiers.
Don't know.
How about frontiers?
Okay. All right. We're doing some live editing here.
Yeah.
And we got to make it
slowly replace this GPT vocabulary in our intro one word at a time over the next
I've already
100 episodes.
Severely edited it, but yeah.
So what's up, guys?
We're back.
It's episode number 32, and we are here to talk about another Cosmic Summit.
For the most part, yeah. We'll probably
but kind of a grab bag of other stuff.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have a conversation.
Yeah. Did you catch my when you were editing the last episode? Did you catch my update I injected in there?
Which one?
About so you remember we were on the Trump shooting episode where there was one of the conspiracies we covered at the end was the conspiracy that it was a hoax, and I showed the video that showed the ear being punctured.
Yeah.
Did you catch my update on that I put in it as you were editing? Turns out that's a fake.
The video of the bullet going through the ear? No way.
Yeah. And I could have known that from the get-go, but I wasn't paying attention. So it was a good lesson.
And what about the photo of the bullet behind him whizzing through the air? Is that also fake?
No, that one's real. To the best of my knowledge, anyway. That one's real because it came out pretty quickly. And it was published by one of the big news agencies, photographers.
Okay. How'd you find out that the one of the hole in his ear opening was fake?
Well, it's pretty easy to tell because the video's flipped. No one actually had video from that side. And you can tell it's flipped because his Make America Great Again hat, the words are backwards.
Okay.
On his hat.
Wow.
So someone flipped the video to make it look like the correct ear, to make it look like the right ear, and then animated his ear being punctured, essentially. And that was pretty convincing, the way they animated it. But so in trying to debunk the hoax, I got hoaxed.
And debunked.
So I threw a little audio update in the file. As I was editing.
Was it? Oh, really?
Yeah.
So in that video file, I don't know if I used that one or not.
No. In our audio file. So at the point we talk about that, once we finished talking about that, I injected a little audio. I recorded it as I was editing. I was like, hey, editing Dean here, and just wanted to update you. This video is fake.
Nice. I didn't catch that, actually.
Yeah. So... you hoaxers,
you're getting good. You're getting quick.
Well, you still have a little hope, but the bullet flying photo, which I did include in our photos for the episode, that one's real to the best of my knowledge. So there sure was live ammunition being fired, and that was whizzing past his head.
Right. And it was really because we used that as evidence to disprove the theory that it was a hoax.
Right.
That the whole thing was a hoax.
Right.
If we hadn't used that as evidence to flat out,
right,
discredit it. But there still is little chance that it's a full-on hoax, at least.
I mean, if we're going to assign a percentage to it, my confidence in that would be like sub 1% probably. But I'm not the type of person who's going to say it's impossible, because there's been crazier things that have happened in history.
I was going to say, I mean, not that I believe this, but I think the idea that the entire rally, the entire thing was like a stage thing. Like you get actors and you get people.
That's an even more extreme
a production.
version.
I do a whole like movie production without there being cameras.
I haven't heard anyone go that far with the hoax theory.
No, I'm not saying I believe it, but I could see some people getting there.
That's like essentially,
especially if we don't get any answers and there's nothing real that happens out of all this, right?
That's like an Alex Jones Parkland level hoax, because now you're accusing people whose family members died of being actors.
True.
Which is what Alex Jones got sued into oblivion for. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that has any validity.
None of us are Alex Jones either, pushing that out to millions of people. And also that lawsuit is kind of BS. But
anyway, so we have a comment from our previous video as well.
Oh, yeah.
So you have that pulled up?
Let me pull that up.
It's on Instagram.
Oh, right. Where did I put it?
Right there, pulpit.
Yep. All right, so this is Pulpit of Misknowledge. He says, hey, it's Mars Brother again. Great episode on the Trump assassination. Before I worked in the biotechnology field, I spent over 15 years working in the business of politics, mainly on initiatives, ballot access, political campaigns, elections, voter outreach, voter suppression, or for both parties, and most of the rest. Things keep changing in politics, not for the better. So I'm glad mostly that I changed paths. From my experience, one side is inept, the other is corrupt. I just worked to get a third party on the ballots across the U.S., and it ended badly for them, thanks to that second party. I doubt the full story of the shooting will ever be revealed to the public. My hat's off to the DNC elites, though. In the last few weeks, they managed to de-energize the excitement from the assassination attempt and flip the election completely. I'm still baffled by why the CrowdStrike stunt was pulled, but they're way smarter than I am.
So okay. Connecting the CrowdStrike stuff to...
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, the CrowdStrike, I mean, I'm sure you are, but the CrowdStrike was, they're a software development company that makes software that essentially you install on computers to help them become hack-proof. It's a bunch of software that runs on the computer that prevents a computer from being hacked. And that very company pushed an update to their software that caused computers around the world to crash with the blue screen of death. And it was pretty amazing seeing the blue screen of death in Times Square on the big displays. A bunch of airlines grounded. It caused pretty much pandemonium, and it happened just after the Trump assassination attempt. So I see, I think that was kind of, if I'm going to go like conspiracy brain where like all of these stories are like interconnected and sort of orchestrated, then you can see how the CrowdStrike might just be a distraction from the Trump assassination attempt as well, just to kind of pull us out with some sort of emergency that actually affects our lives, right? The Trump assassination affects our lives, but in a less direct way, right? Whereas the CrowdStrike thing, if you had a flight, if you were walking down Times Square, if you had a business running any of this software, like this directly put a stop to what you had going on. Also, by the way, the CrowdStrike thing is crazy because it just goes to show, like, when companies all over the world trust in one software to keep them secure, all of a sudden that one software becomes a giant honeypot.
Giant target. Yeah.
And so how does that software company, how does CrowdStrike protect themselves from infiltration by intelligence agencies and
or physical
corrupt actors?
Yeah.
Or even just like, people with like terroristic aims,
Yep.
ideologues from, being recruited as programmers. And, what if it's just a matter of one programmer pushing out an update incorrectly? That's all it takes to take down this much infrastructure across the world. That is kind of terrifying. So hopefully the world learns some lessons from that.
Yeah.
I know it affected my company. Well, not our company, but a bunch of our customers. We do sort of IT related-ish work. And I had a number of customers go down from it.
Did they call you about it directly?
Well,
or they just let you know that
we don't install CrowdStrike,
right.
But some of the PCs that we put out for people, for companies, their IT staff install CrowdStrike on the servers we provide them. And so it was their IT company's problem to get those computers back up. But then for some of them, once they came back up, the computers were busted in other ways that I had to then fix. But
I see.
Anyway.
Yeah, the only thing I can see is if, imagine it comes out in one of these investigations that the CrowdStrike had affected government computers and
well, it would, yeah.
And information was wiped or files weren't saved, and now we have no idea. That could be where a lot of conspiracists would go with that if something like that was to come out.
But I think the greater point in this message is like the genius of how the Democrats have kind of like flipped the attention away from the Trump assassination,
right?
With all the Kamala Harris drama, and
the momentum that
Joe Biden drama.
Yep.
I mean, it was such a crazy event, the assassination attempt, because I mean, honestly, if you're just honest, even if you don't like Trump, unless you're like totally like blinded by Trump hate, it's so hard to not see him come out of that with a fist pump saying fight. And like, even if you don't like him, you kind of have to acknowledge that was a badass moment.
Yeah. And how powerful that was for people who are like really entrenched in the Republican dogma, all that,
So to then like take that energy that was moving forward for Trump and sort of flip it.
Right.
It's interesting.
Definitely de-energizes it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mars brother. We appreciate the comment.
And thanks for continuing to listen.
Yeah.
So what else we got? We got this interesting little video clip from Neil deGrasse that you want to play?
Yeah, so this is a clip taken from their larger conversation. So if you want any more context than what you get here, this is just pulled from Instagram as a catchy thing, and it definitely caught my interest. But yeah, we can play this.
These things are hard to play in the browser because you can't really pause them. I don't want to start playing it midway. Here we go. Why don't they give these things a timeline so you can just click to restart it?
Depends on if it's a story or not.
Yeah.
Been the same since we had lunch. You explained to me, and I've said it here, the fabric of space-time might be woven by wormholes that connect the virtual particle pairs that come in and out of existence.
So it's like a little quantum net holding the whole universe together.
Exactly right. We find mathematically if we cut the threads of quantum entanglement, space falls apart. It discretizes into little tiny pieces and then just disappears.
I have not been the same.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Huh.
I kind of connect that in a way to the Einstein's intuition thing.
Yeah.
Just right off the top of my head. Like the quantum level and it being these like wormhole like bubbles that are like the fabric of space-time, right? It's like at the smallest level. These little bubbles of chance or whatever they are, you know?
Yeah. So virtual particle pairs, right? So we're talking like when you
Quantum
have two
entanglement, that's what we're
entangled
talking about.
particles and yeah, they're entangled, then you can spread them out from each other. The distance doesn't matter. And if a change on one, you can instantly measure on the other.
They're saying that connection is a wormhole, no matter the distance. So that the fact that there are all of these wormholes by all of these pairs across the expanse of the universe,
Yeah, it sort of
that
creates
might be-
a web.
that might be what's actually holding
Space together is what they're saying.
space-time.
Huh.
It's interesting thought.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I mean, pretty much all of this quantum mechanics and entanglement is all just like philosophy, really,
Yeah.
you know?
I still want an explanation for why mass and gravity are interlinked and how they're interlinked, right? Like, what is it about something having mass that causes
intrinsically gives it this effect.
distortion of space-time?
Because if you think of it like the woven thing, like we've seen on the thing, like the weight of it actually pushes on these tunnels, which makes these wormholes larger or stretches them out.
Yeah.
But there's always that connection. And three-dimensionally, as something sits, it's maybe it's constantly falling through it, right? Like at whatever speed, like the wormholes are, like you can imagine like a ball, like an actual heavy like bowling ball falling through like a very loosely woven like knit of some kind.
Yeah.
And it like falling through and it hits a snag and then it like bounces, goes the other way. I don't know how that would connect it to, you know, the certain force, but
Yeah. Well, because, you know, like the whole trampoline visualization they
Right.
always go with,
But
like
that's
the
what's
sheet of cloth. And,
two-dimensional.
yeah. A, it's two-dimensional, but B, it's circular reasoning, right? Because you drop a bowling ball in the middle, it distorts the sheet. But what is causing that? Well, the gravity of the ball. But then the sheet you're saying is gravity. So like you're having to use gravity to explain gravity.
Right,
I mean, I know
right.
it's just a visual demonstration and it's not actually their explanation.
But it does make it easy to visualize what you're saying.
It makes
like,
it easy to
disconnect
to visualize what distorted space-time is. And I think that's the whole point of the visual demonstration.
Yeah.
It's not to explain it as much as to help you visualize.
It helps you visualize it in a certain way, but also like you imagine that distortion three-dimensionally around an object.
Yeah.
Or it's just weird it's hard to visualize it. Even 2D, it makes you question it more because if that's happening in all dimensions, what does it actually look like?
Yeah.
So maybe the woven nature of it might help explain how it tugs and maybe why it's certain areas of a specific mass might have more or less gravity too.
Yeah, but I think there's like a pretty well-defined proportionality between mass and gravity. Like we know X amount of mass cause X amount of gravitational distortion, right? And you can calculate that. So like we can measure the mass of Jupiter and know because of the mass of Jupiter how much gravity you're going to experience when you're on there, right? And it doesn't matter what type of matter. What matters is the amount of mass, right? So in the same way, like it wouldn't matter if things are entangled or not. As long as they have mass, they have the constant effect on gravity.
But what if it's also like not spherical and there's like a lopsided amount of mass on an object?
Then that's, it would, the closer you are, they would essentially on that side of the object, on the massive side of the object, if you stood there, you would be closer to the center of mass of the gravitational field, and therefore you would feel a stronger pull.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like trying to actually like visualize it 3-dimensionally is like impossible unless we have like a way zoomed out.
Yeah. Well, the Einstein's intuition thing, or the we never did a show on the other video series, the dialectic series.
No, I don't think we did.
Dude, let's do that soon.
Okay.
Because their idea, they have a bunch of ideas that kind of throw out that go in the face. Well, they're like alternate explanations for relativity or alternate ways to like understand it. And they, in one of their videos, explain gravity as like flowing space-time.
Okay.
Which is cool and hard to explain off the cuff myself, but let's do a video or a podcast on that.
All right.
Let's see. And then you save this. We'll share this. This thing is cool. This is Hubble captures vivid auroras on Jupiter. It's even got video here of these auroras on Jupiter. And this is really cool looking. The auroras are like, they're such a bright blue.
Yeah, it's very vivid.
Our auroras are mostly like green and like red. I don't know if I've ever seen blue auroras. So this was posted by Astrophysics Mania. The auroras are brilliant curtains of light in Jupiter's upper atmosphere. Jovian auroral storms, like Earth's, develop when electrically charged particles trapped in the magnetic field surrounding the planet spiral inward at high energies towards the north and south magnetic poles.
Cool looking.
Yeah,
just seeing
so
that like
cool.
outside trail kind of spiraling in.
Yeah, it's got these like
right
arms.
where it ignites.
They look like
almost.
galaxies almost. These like they almost look like these galactic arms.
It's cool looking.
And then this one. This is
Oh yeah.
Drew sent this to us just to. This is like a new variation on flat Earth theory, I guess.
Yeah, they're evolving. They're evolving.
So it's got this one image that says images of the supposed flat Earth, and it's got like, you know, the quote unquote flat Earth model with this giant ice field with the Earth inside of it. But the Earth is obviously shaped like the UN flag with the North Pole at the center.
Yep.
And then the next image zooms out and it shows that, that beyond that ice wall is just a giant thing of ice, but there's a bunch of other holes in the ice with other Earths.
Other worlds.
And then it zooms out again, shows a third image that there's actually a spherical planetoid-like thing.
That's like potholed with like
That's
Swiss
potholed
cheese.
with all these worlds inside their own ice walls. So flat Earth is so flat and so big that it ends up becoming round again. I think it's hilarious. I don't know if anyone actually believes this, but
it's funny either way.
it's hilarious. Yeah, it's got a photo here of a rocket taking off.
Showing the
so maybe
path.
I was saying maybe they're doing this so that they can explain rocket launches because there's so many of them. Maybe like this new brand of flat earthers, like hey, if we explain it this way, like we can still accept rocket launches as real.
Yeah, we're just visiting other planets, but the other planets are just other potholes in our overall spherical planet we live on.
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah, that's hilarious. And then I got another video that, well, I'm not going to cover the video, but I'm not going to play the video, but it's another one by Anton Petrov, and I'll leave a link to it. But he is covering a paper in this video, which is analyzing some of the metal specimens that were, that was supposedly from the Roswell crash.
Oh. Okay. They actually published their findings on it?
So this paper is on the AARO website, AARO.mil. I'll link the paper and the Anton Petrov video where he goes into deeper explanation of it. But I'll read part of this introduction and then the conclusion here. Introduction. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, sponsored a series of measurements on a layered material specimen primarily composed of magnesium and zinc with bands of bismuth and other co-located trace elements. The material specimen, whose origin and purpose are of long and debated history, is claimed to have been recovered from an unidentified anomalous phenomenon crash in or around 1947. Furthermore, the specimen's physiochemical properties are claimed to make the material capable of inertial mass reduction, i.e. levitation and or anti-gravity functionality, possibly attributable to the material's bismuth and magnesium layers acting as a terahertz waveguide. Previously, U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command, DEVCOM, established a cooperative research and development agreement with To the Stars Academy to evaluate the feasibility of exploiting the potential disruptive technology associated with this widely discussed specimen. AARO, founded in 2022, is congressionally mandated to explore historical records of UAP incidences and publicly report its findings. Although the long chain of custody for the specimen cannot be verified, public and media interest in the specimen warranted a transparent investigation that adhered to the scientific method. Subsequent to the TTSA DevCom CRADA AARO structured science and technology partner Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one of the 17 U.S. Department of Energy national labs, to independently assess and perform thorough characterization studies on the specimen, leveraging Oak Ridge National Lab's 80-year history of world-leading materials and science expertise.
So they got all of those acronyms plus 17 different labs. No kidding, you're having a hard time keeping track of where it's all going and coming from and who's had touched it. And
well, the thing is like in science, if you want to know something for sure, you have to have chain of custody documentation. Right. So like if scientists go out in the field and take like ice core samples or whatever, every time that thing gets moved, there's a, chain of custody documentation every time it changes hands. And you have to have that chain of custody documentation in order to have trust that verified. What you're looking at is what you think you're looking at, right?
What's being reported is actually the document you receive or whatever, right?
Right, because without full chain of custody going all the way back to the discovery of the object or item in question, then you can't know for certain that the thing didn't get switched out, right? So,
and you need the documentation to be able to look at it and be like, okay, these are all the characteristics. This is all the things that are saying it is.
Right.
The object I'm looking at is what's being described.
So, essentially what this is saying is that because we don't have chain of custody on it, under normal scientific conditions, you wouldn't necessarily expend a bunch of resources to look into the object because it's not going to be proof anyway because you don't have chain of custody, right?
So they're saying that they're having issues with the chain of custody?
Well, they're saying the chain of custody isn't well established here. Right. So
the object that they're actually examining, there's a potential for
what they're saying, there's a potential that this is not actually from Roswell. Right.
Okay. Got it.
Which is funny because they're undercutting their own research, which seems to be poo-pooing this. So there's a bunch of cool photos
That's
here.
Just the introduction, though.
Yeah, there's a bunch of cool photos here, and they talk about the type of analysis they do, morphology, structure, what methods they're doing. Backscattered electron images here showing the different layering. They're looking for crystalline structure.
Plasma mass spectrometry. spectrometry.
They're looking for crystalline structures because it was purported that the bismuth is
Had
like set up in
antigravitic,
these like super
right?
thin crystalline layers, and that's part of how it can become a terahertz waveguide or whatever.
All right.
So
Because those are the things that are being claimed, right? So they're trying
Right.
to see the validity of the claims based
Right.
on the object.
So I'll just read the conclusion here, and then if you want the full details, check out the Anton Petrov video or the actual scientific paper, which I'll.
And this
I'll
is just
link as
one of
well.
the labs, right? Or is this the
This is Oak Ridge
culmination
National
of all-
Laboratory. So AARO had access to the sample,
Yeah.
and an AARO sent it to Oak Ridge National Lab to have them do the comprehensive suite of testing on it.
Got it.
So AARO secured Oak Ridge National Lab to independently assess the requirements necessary to confirm or contest public claims that this historical specimen is of non-terrestrial origin and that it is capable of functioning as a bismuth-based terahertz waveguide. Although the origin, chain of custody, and ultimate purpose of the specimen remain unclear, a modern and robust analysis of its chemical and structural composition and properties does not indicate that its origin is non-terrestrial. Nor do the data indicate that the material examined ever had the pure single crystalline bismuth layer that could possibly have acted as a terahertz waveguide. The intended or actual past use of the material remains undetermined, but Oak Ridge National Labs has a high level of confidence that all data indicate the material was manufactured terrestrially, albeit using an uncommon mixture of elements by today's standards, and then incurred damage caused by mechanical and heat stressors.
Right. So it could be a highly, manufactured
Yeah.
outside what you would normally see, but does it have any special properties is basically a no.
Right.
As far as what they were
Anton
looking for,
Petrov
right?
covers in his video at one point is that I believe I think I got this from his video, not someone else talking about it, but that there was a phase in aircraft experimentation and development where they were testing aircraft built with all sorts of different material components.
Yeah, to see how they worked and how well they worked in the air, how dynamic anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was a phase where they were using magnesium and zinc.
Yeah.
So that's actually part of apparently known aerospace history. So
Yeah, what if at one point they tried
essentially,
a metallic disc and they tried to fly it like a normal plane and they gave it and then it just crashed and then they were like, oh crap, we look like idiots. Let's
Right.
cover it up for no reason.
anyway, but because of the chain of custody issues, this doesn't actually, like, this still leaves room open for saying, oh, the material got switched out by the Men in Black, right? They swapped it with something that was clearly terrestrial made and similar. So one could make that argument if you still want to believe that this particular piece is from a UFO, or at least the one that this was, that the replacement. Anyway, and then the other aspect to this is if you go back to Roswell and like go through all the information surrounding it, some of the eyewitness testimony was that, you know, the first people on scene found this like foil-like substance that felt and looked like aluminum foil, but you could like crumple it up and then let go and it would bounce back to its original shape.
Right.
And to my knowledge, I believe what happened is those samples were being passed around and then they disappeared. So, to my knowledge, no one publicly has access to those. And that was the most interesting thing in my mind. Although I have heard like the Gary Nolans and some people like that talking about this magnesium zinc sample.
Yeah. I mean,
and wanting to test it.
Yeah, it's possible that it has different properties or they're looking at the wrong use.
Yeah.
Could still be used for something else.
or could
Or it
just
could be a nice
part
shell
of the
to
like if
protect
the whole
it.
UFO thing is real and there's really this like disinformation campaign.
Right,
Yeah,
it
this
come
could
from
just
that.
be people who have access to like old crashed airplane parts, like putting out these samples and getting the community to like believe that these are samples of UFOs and whatnot.
Right. Which wouldn't be that difficult for some of these people to buy into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly weird, shady, and intelligentsia stuff going on inside these topics. So
I'm just flabbergasted that To the Stars Academy is so close in on a lot of these things. And like, what have they done recently? Like, I haven't seen much from.
I don't know.
What is it? I mean, what is their? I mean, he was on Joe Rogan, and is Lou Elizondo still there?
I don't think he is.
I feel like he left,
them.
right? And there
Yeah.
was one other person that was there.
Yeah. Was
It's
it Gary
not-
Nolan?
Maybe it was Gary.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Gary Nolan. I don't know. I feel like both of them left. Too.
I saw a recent Gary Nolan video posted. I haven't watched it yet, where he's essentially calling out Neil deGrasse for his attitude in covering the UFO topic or lack of covering the UFO topic, like the ridicule and scorn that he puts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not productive. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You could
And as
disbelieve all
a
you
credentialed
want,
scientist, Gary Nolan's like, no, this stuff is worth investigating. And like, definitely, it's the joking and the attitude that he didn't appreciate. I just caught like a few second clip of it, but
I mean, that's
I
what
wanna
we've been
watch the
talking
whole
about for
thing.
so long now. Just the attitude toward it is putting off professionals from coming out and speaking
Right.
on their expertise about any type of thing they might find interesting within the UFO topic.
right.
We're not talking about finding alien bodies. We're talking about like evidence that there may have been some sort of craft or whatever these orbs that everybody's seeing, Tic Tacs, whatever they are,
Yeah.
All right, we'll take our first break.
Yeah, we're over here. So we'll play another Stevie Nader song here. This is his song. It's the first song off his second album. It's called Grit. It sounds
Enjoy.
cool as heck. Enjoy.
Don't set it down, think it's not enough. Don't give in, never gas you up. Never lose sight, never lose the luck. Keep it all in, never spew my guts. Let the fire burn, let it burn me up. Burn me up, burn me up. Take a step back, let me soak it in. If I fall off, let me go again. Keep the fire blaze with a lose a win, but never lose. Never listen to the doomsayers. Do no harm, prove 'em wrong, prove 'em wrong, prove 'em wrong.
if I've listened to his whole second album. I don't remember this one.
This album is great.
Hell yeah.
Great.
So I've got another article.
What you got?
In Nature. I was trying to find it on the browser, but I'll read it off my phone. So I'm sure some people have seen it already. It's been all over social media too. But in Nature, published July 22nd, 2024, by David Castelvecchi. It's titled Mystery Oxygen Source Discovered on the Sea Floor. Bewildering Scientists. A chemical reaction could be producing oxygen by splitting the water molecules, but its source of energy remains unknown. Something is pumping out large amounts of oxygen at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean at depths where a total lack of sunlight makes photosynthesis impossible. Where the phenomenon was discovered in a region strewn with ancient plum-sized formations called polymetallic nodules.
Polymetallic nodules?
Yeah. Which could play a part in the oxygen production by catalyzing the splitting of water molecules. Researchers suspect the findings are published in Nature, and the findings are published in Nature Geoscience. A quote here: "We have another source of oxygen on the planet other than photosynthesis," says study co-author Andrew Sweetman, a seafloor ecologist at the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban, UK. Although the mechanism behind the oxygen production remains a mystery, the findings could also have implications for understanding how life began, he says, as well as the possible impact of deep-sea mining in the region. The observation is fascinating, says Donald Canfield, a biochemist at University of Southern Denmark in Odense. Quote, but I could find it frustrating because it raises a lot of questions and not very many answers. Sweetman and his collaborators first noticed something amiss during fieldwork in 2013. The researchers were studying seafloor ecosystems in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, an area between Hawaii and Mexico, which is larger than India and a potential target for the mining of metal-rich nodules. During such expeditions, the teams released a module that sinks to the seafloor to perform automated experiments. Once there, the module drives cylindrical chambers down to close off small sections of the seafloor, together with some seawater, and create an enclosed microcosm of the seafloor. The authors write, the lander then measures how the concentration of oxygen in the confined seawater changes over periods of up to several days. That's interesting. So they're sending down these pods, they're hitting the seafloor, and then they're creating their own atmosphere or microcosm.
Yeah, they're like they're taking these samples that include the seafloor as well as the water. A
little bit of water.
So it's a little microcosm of the seafloor.
Yeah.
So they'll capture that, they'll measure it.
Yeah.
And then they'll wait a few days, and over time they'll take more and more measurements and see how the content of oxygen changes.
Concentration of the oxygen is confined in the seawater.
Yeah, okay.
So oxygen currents. Without any synthetic organisms releasing oxygen into the water, and with any other organism consuming the gas oxygen concentrates inside the chambers should slowly fall. Sweetman has seen that happen in studies he has conducted in the areas of the southern Arctic and Indian Oceans and in the Atlantic. Around the world, seafloor ecosystems owe their existence to oxygen carried by currents from the surface and would quickly die if cut off. Most of that oxygen originates in the North Atlantic and is carried to deep oceans around the world by a global conveyor belt. But in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, the instruments showed that the sequestered water became richer, not poorer in oxygen at first. At first, Sweetman attributed the readings to a sensor malfunction, but the phenomenon kept occurring during subsequent trips in 2021 and 2022 and was confirmed by measurements with an alternative technique. Quote, I suddenly realized that for 8 years I've been ignoring this potentially amazing new process. 4,000 meters down on the ocean floor, says Sweetman. They got this cool a polymetallic nodule found on the seafloor, which researchers think could be involved in the oxygen production. They got one.
Oh, cool. You know what that makes me think of? The polymetallic nodule. It makes me think of... you ever played the game Subnautica?
Not a whole lot.
Oh, dude, that game is so cool.
Yeah, I know you talked about it before, but I haven't played it much.
If you're a nerd and you like video games, it's a perfect nerd video game. You like go around. It's like a survival game. You like gather resources and you like build stuff and to survive on the ocean planet. But in that game, like you have to mine all these ores and stuff. And there's these like little deposits all over the place that have them. So I guess those are polymetallic nodules.
I would say so. So the amounts of oxygen produced are not small. The gas in the chambers reaches concentrations higher than those seen in algae-rich surface waters.
Wow.
So yeah, this isn't like just a small amount of oxygen being produced here. Sweetman says none of the other regions Sweetman was surveying contained polymetallic nodules, suggesting that these rocks have an important role in the production of this dark oxygen, as they're calling it. As a first test of this hypothesis, the team recreated the conditions found on the seafloor in a laboratory on their ship. They monitored samples collected from the seafloor, which included polymetallic nodules, and saw that the oxygen concentration increased, at least for a while. They start producing oxygen up to a point, then they stop, says Sweetman, presumably because the energy that drives the splitting of the water molecules gets depleted. This leaves the question of where that energy is coming from. If the nodules themselves were acting as batteries producing energy from a chemical reaction, they would have to become depleted long. They would have had to become depleted long ago.
Right.
So the electric potential, but the nodules could serve as catalysts, enabling the splitting of water and the formation of molecular oxygen. The researchers measured voltages across the surface of nodules and found that voltage differences of up to 0.95 volts. This is not quite the 1.5 volts needed to split a water molecule, but in principle, higher voltages could be produced in the same way that battery voltages can be doubled by connecting two batteries in a series, Sweetman says.
Right.
So if they're connected through the water and there's multiple creating this effect, then the area in between it would be super high concentrated in. It's just where that initial energy is coming from for them to act that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Which could be coming from the energy waves moving through the earth at all times. Like, I don't know. Could be something that they're capturing. Maybe the mixture of the metallic nodule at the water, the pressure, all those different things create the condition for this to happen, you know?
Yeah.
It's just something new that we haven't seen yet.
Where's all the hydrogen going?
So they're going to talk about the electric potential. Oh, wait, no, we talked about that a little bit, but they have a chemist here, and maybe he'll illuminate it. Are you reading it too?
I'm reading a little AI summary.
So, co-author Franz Geiger, a chemist at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, says that it is unclear yet whether the reaction also produces molecular hydrogen, which happens in industrial electrolyzer reactions thanks to a catalyst, or releases protons in in the water while shuffling the leftover electrons somewhere else.
Right.
But understanding it could end up having useful applications, he says. Perhaps there's some blueprint there at the bottom of the ocean that could help us make a better catalyst. Eva Stuniken, biochemist at the University of St. Andrews in UK, says that the results could also have implications for proposals to look for the signature of possible life in the light spectrum of the extrasolar planets.
Say that again?
So they're saying that it could have implications on the proposals to look for a signature of possible life in the light spectrum of extrasolar planets.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The presence of O2 gas on other planets would perhaps have to be interpreted with additional caution, she says.
Right. Finding oxygen is like, because now we have an abiotic source of generating oxygen. Now, if you find signatures of oxygen on another planet, that doesn't prove that there's life there anymore. Right. That doesn't prove that there's photosynthesis happening.
Not full stop, yeah.
Right.
It depends on where the sources are coming from, right? I guess if you're just connecting, you're just looking for the signature, right? They're not.
Right. Well, because before this discovery, the only known way of creating the oxygen is to have photosynthesis happening. Because the thing with oxygen, my understanding anyway, is like when a planet comes together, it's coming together with all these different elements, right? And why wouldn't oxygen be one of those elements? Well, it would. But the thing is, oxygen is a highly volatile element, and it's reacts very, very easily. And so it won't stay around in an environment if the only oxygen you have is the oxygen you started with.
Right.
So
that's where process.
Yeah, well, it's going to react with things that interact with it.
Yeah.
That's where we get the term to oxidize, right? Mm-hmm. Different things oxidize, which means that oxygen is reacting, which is forming different chemical formations. So at that point, the oxygen is wrapped up in these other chemicals, and there's not just freely floating oxygen anymore.
Right.
So you have to have a way of constantly producing that oxygen in order for it to survive in abundance in an atmosphere. So that's interesting, because that also sort of rewrites our evolutionary history, right? Because part of the evolutionary history is that life started out with single cells, and it slowly becomes more complicated, and then at some point the ancestors of plants learned photosynthesis, right?
Yeah.
And once photosynthesis was evolved, then all of these life forms that come off of that tree of evolution are converting sunlight into CO2 for themselves, and they're expelling oxygen, and that now we have a mechanism to start filling the atmosphere with oxygen. Mm-hmm. And it's not until then that you can then get life forms that require the oxygen to live. You have to have the oxygen before you can have the life forms that rely on it.
Yeah, I'm curious that mechanism to switch from not being reliant, like how does that play out in evolution?
Well, so like that forces you to have like the plant, like the photosynthesizing life forms, they have to come earlier than oxygen dependent life forms.
Right.
But now that there's an abiotic source of oxygen, it could be the case that oxygen has been around, and in that case,
it could be
that order of operations doesn't necessarily have to be that way. There could have been oxygen-dependent life forms before the photosynthetic life forms, or alongside.
Or alongside it, yeah.
If oxygen existed before photosynthesis did, you know?
Or if that's the reason why some of the life in the oceans is dependent on oxygen, and they've been around for a long time. Maybe they've been around for even longer because they had a different source of the oxygen at one point in their history, maybe. And then when they realized they could just surface and get a big breath,
Yeah.
right? Like whales or any other type of like mammal in the ocean.
But that also, because they're saying they're not sure if it's splitting off hydrogen as such or if it's actually splitting the hydrogen molecules themselves so that there's free protons and free electrons. And that brought up the question in my head. So if you know the answer to this, right, I mean, I could just type it in AI, but
it's not as fun.
If you have a proton without an electron, is that still hydrogen? If you have a free proton, because hydrogen is the most simple element, right? It's just a proton and an electron. And I think you can have a neutron on there too. But if you just have a proton by itself, because other elements, you can have different amounts of electrons, right? You can have extra, or you can have totally full electron shells, or you can have, partial, missing electrons. Yeah. And that's still the same element. It's just different charge.
It's like a different isotope or whatever.
Well, isotope has to do with the neutrons, I believe, that are on it.
Oh, okay.
But if you're hydrogen and you only have one electron, and if that electron goes away, is it still hydrogen if it's just a naked proton?
Let us know. We're not going to type it into AI because somebody will tell us. Somebody else type it into AI and then tell us.
I'm not going to lie. I'm probably going to type it in anyway.
So yeah, just the conclusion of that, Sweetman says that before deep mining starts, researchers should map the areas where oxygen production is occurring. Otherwise, ecosystems that have become dependent on that oxygen could collapse if the nodules are removed. If there's oxygen being produced in large amounts, it's possibly going to be important for the animals that are living there. So yeah, just a little warning or a plea and to not go and destroy this ecosystem so we can study it.
Don't go mining polymetallic nodules.
Yeah.
Those things in themselves are interesting. I wonder where they come from.
Yeah.
So I did a Perplexity AI search on it. Polymetallic nodules are also known as manganese nodules, are mineral concretations found on the ocean floor that contain valuable metals. Here are the key points. Composition and formulation. They're composed of concentric layers of iron and manganese hydroxides around a core. Nodules form through the precipitation of metals from seawater. And sediment pour water over millions of years. They contain significant amounts of manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt, as well as trace amounts of other metals like rare earth elements. They range in size from microscopic particles to over 20 centimeters across, but most are 3 to 10 centimeters in diameter. They have varied surface textures from smooth to rough, often spherical or irregularly shaped. This makes me think of like pearls.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too, like a metal pearl down at the bottom being formed by the metals separating from the seawater.
Yeah. They're found in both shallow and deep waters worldwide, including the Baltic Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Largest and most economically significant deposits occur in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. That's the one mentioned in the article.
That's the one they're covering there, yeah.
In the Pacific Ocean at depths of 4,000 to 6,000 meters. Other major areas include the Peru Basin and Indian Ocean nodule fields and the Penrhyn Basin near Cook Islands. Economic potential. CCZ alone is estimated to contain about 21 billion tons of nodules. The nodules could potentially supply metals for millions of electric vehicles. Mining nodules is seen as a possible alternative to terrestrial mining, potentially with lower environmental impacts in some respects. Well, not anymore.
Not in this case. I think we need to study this oxygen phenomenon.
Yeah, that would be pretty unfortunate if we just started crazy mining these nodules and then killing underwater ocean ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean that would be the opposite of what they're saying there, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, this is not from their PR. This is from.
Well, this was
AI.
me just asking you about the nodules.
Right. But their value is already it's already publicly known. Like people know about it.
Mining raises concerns about impacts on marine ecosystems. Industries working on developing technologies and practices to minimize environmental disturbance. Well, can't do that if they require them to just be there in order for the oxygen to be created.
Yeah.
Huh. Polymetallic nodules. I like that. That could be a band name. All right, cool. Well, we're actually at an hour, so why don't we take another break here, and then we'll come back and start talking about some Cosmic Summit stuff.
Cool.
This is... So we already played... so our intro was sampled from Stevie's song MF Dream, right?
Yeah.
And on our previous episode, I played the acoustic version of that, which is the one that was sampled. So this is the fully produced version of the song.
Of the full song that our intro is. Okay.
Yeah. And it's called MF Dream, featuring Sean Lamarr.
To this music, it's either that or I go hell. 8 of us in 2 bedrooms, too broke to afford a motel, but that's motor fuel for this movement. Just think of the stories that I'm gon' tell. I'm so young and gifted, so high I'm lifted, with eyes wide shut, but it's my dream and I won't miss it. All these rappers mad, they look at me like competition, but these beats are bad like voodoo dolls. I stick my pens in dreaming, 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 dreaming.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I like this version.
Yeah. It's totally different.
Yeah.
You You could almost call it a remix rather than like a fully produced version because it's, Stevie's part of it is really stripped down.
Right.
But Sean's verse on there is so sick.
Yeah.
So what do we got, Drew?
So I watched the majority of Dr. Robert Schoch's presentation. And it's a lot of the same stuff that he's been talking about. And I didn't catch the end, so I don't know if maybe he talks more about his idea of it being
the solar
event. I don't know if he goes into it much at the end, but...
Do you have photos to show with this? Should I switch the monitor cable?
No, not really. Not on this one.
Cool.
He does, and I will allude to them.
Okay.
And I will allude to other of his works to find some of these things.
Sweet.
But yeah, basically, the majority of his premises, he got brought into the research of the Sphinx by Graham and John Anthony West.
Right.
Because he worked with John Anthony West in the 90s when he first brought him to Giza. And actually cue up that first clip.
Okay. The one from 442?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a snippet of Robert Schoch on the Joe Rogan show experience.
Way back, I was reading about ancient Egypt when I was literally 6, 7, 8 years old. I had a grandmother who had a wonderful library at the time, and I would go through her library. She had books from the British Museum on ancient Egypt going back to the turn of the century. So I was prepared in the sense I was open to such things, but I didn't imagine getting involved in Egypt in any way professionally.
Did you have any thoughts about the dating of the Sphinx or the pyramids or anything back then before you looked into it?
Yeah, there were two things. So there were two things going on in my head back then, which maybe prepped me for this. Number one, I knew the conventional story. I knew that the Sphinx goes back to 2500 BC, according to the standard Egyptologists. In 1989, which is when I believe it was 1989, I first actually met West in person. I had in my mind that the Egyptologists must be correct because they've studied it. They must know what they're doing. I was coming from an academic point of view. I'm just giving, saying where I'm coming from.
Right.
I had gone to Yale University to get my PhD in geology and geophysics. I was very well grounded in, quote, the status quo academic point of view. So I thought when I first went to Egypt, I would just prove West wrong. I would just prove that the Egyptologists knew what they were talking about. But.
Yeah. So he basically just lays out that he was fully prepared to
just
confirm the idea, just to confirm the mainstream idea.
Right.
And he gets there, and the next clip will kind of give you an idea of like what it was like when he first got there, and like his ideas as soon as he saw it for himself in person. So we can cue that up.
Okay.
Honestly, when I first went to Egypt with John Anthony West in 1990, I thought before I got off the plane that this would be simple open and shut case. I would prove him wrong in the sense of his assertions that maybe the Sphinx was older. I had no doubt at the time that my colleagues in Egyptology must know what they're talking about, and all of that changed literally within 30, without exaggerating, 30 to 120 seconds of first seeing the Sphinx. Yeah, it really did.
What was your first impression?
Because my first impression of the Sphinx was, now that I saw it on the ground, in person, there was something wrong with the Egyptological dating. Because when you look at the Sphinx, as a geologist with a geological eye, this was not weathered by wind and sand. This was not desert erosion and weathering that I saw on the Sphinx, the body of the Sphinx, which is very difficult to tell because it's been heavily repaired and reworked, but particularly on the walls of what are known as the Sphinx enclosure. The Sphinx enclosure is important because it preserves a lot of the details. And if the audience has not been to Egypt, they should realize that when they carved the Sphinx, it's all solid bedrock. only the head initially was above the ground surface. They carved down into the rock to free up the body, what I call the core body of the Sphinx. And it's that core body and the walls of the enclosure, more or less the quarry around it, if you want to use that term, that show these ancient weathering, precipitation, erosional features that are incompatible with the last 5,000 years of climatic history on the east.
Yeah. On the eastern side of the Sahara is what he was going to say there.
Okay.
So like there hasn't been enough water within the last 5,000 years,
right,
to create
to have caused that amount of water
weathering.
Erosion.
And like he was describing the bed, like when it was created, it was carved down in the bedrock, but then it was covered by sand and other debris. And when they found it, they had to they just saw, obviously when they carved it too, they did the head and then they carved down to create the body, obviously, and then they created this quarry of blocks that were then used for some of their other constructions nearby. But it was covered by sand and stuff over time, so they can date these weather erosion. Yeah, Dean's pulling up a sky view. Damn, that was quick. Nice to zoom in.
Thank you. So if we go, did not have 3D of the Sphinx? What the heck?
That's disappointing.
Yeah, what the heck?
Looks funny.
So yeah,
maybe it's just the browser version.
Yeah, it could be. I think if I was on true Google Earth here.
Yeah.
So I'll leave a photo here of the Sphinx. So in case you haven't looked at this before, I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard this before, but so the Sphinx enclosure, which is what he's talking about, is the portion of the bedrock that had to be cut out in order to release the body, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can see here these walls around the Sphinx
are basically as tall as it, at least shoulder height.
Right. And it's those walls that show the intense weathering, because while the Sphinx has been repaired multiple times, the walls have
stayed
not.
True. Yeah. They did take a lot of those blocks and build a lot of that temple you're seeing there right in front of it, the Sphinx temple.
Mm-hmm.
Valley Temple.
Right.
But yeah, so they're dating, or he's seeing these erosional patterns on the wall, and some places on the Sphinx, but it's been so heavily repaired over time that they can't get as much of the same evidence off of the Sphinx itself. But because you're seeing it on the enclosure, like those patterns show that there's been a huge water event that created that.
Yeah.
Here we go. The real deal. So yeah. So some more information on his thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So he attributes the patterns to prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, which is characteristic of the Nile Valley's climate before 5000 BCE. So that's what, 7,000 years ago?
Yes.
This suggests that the Sphinx predates the Sahara Desert's arid conditions, which began around 3000 BCE.
Mm.
So the Sphinx was around
back when?
Way back.
Right.
Before they're dating it, because they're dating it at 2500 BC or 3000 BC.
Right. So you have to go to that far back to get to where there was rainfall.
Yeah.
But then you still need a ton of rainfall in that time period to cause the erosion that we're seeing.
The more rainfall. Yeah, right.
So you can't just go back to when it rained. You have to go back far enough to inside of when it rained that there was enough rain to create the weathering.
Right. Plus the advancement of like being able to do something like this, like we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about a long time ago, like we're putting it closer to 8,000, you know.
So what does he say as far as the dating then? Does he give his own date, or he just says it has to be at least here?
It has to be within that range, basically. That was before. He's saying it had to have been before 5,000 BC because that's probably when there was enough. So anything, there was enough rain in the area to cause that weathering, is what he's saying. Right. Anything later than 5,000
would be BCE. Too new.
Would be too
recent and not enough rainfall.
Not enough rainfall to create that much. But then that means it had to be, like you're saying, like it had to have been built and already in place before.
Right. It had to have been built and already in place. And then enough time goes by while there's still heavy rainfalls.
Yeah. So it can't be like 5,001 BCE that it was, or 5,000 or 5,100 BCE.
Right.
Because, I guess in 100 years you could probably get enough rainfall. But anyway, I'm just saying to where it becomes too arid to produce that. Anyway.
Yeah. Schoch would be better.
So some of the limestone weathering, the type of weathering seen on the Sphinx is more consistent with water erosion than wind, like he described. Because the wind typically produces sharp and angular features, while water erosion results in smoother, rounded forms. So especially to a geologist who looks at this stuff all the time, they'd be able to tell pretty quick, usually.
Plus, wouldn't water create more vertical features?
That's what he's saying, because it runs down, but it creates smoother. So, like, instead of like sharp angles,
right,
where it's still going to hit those weak points, the wind and the sand is still going to hit those weak points. It's going to create a sharper angle than the water when it flows over it and over time.
And that makes sense, because if you think about it, like, if you have wind coming and hitting a rock surface, right, and it's that wind is carrying sand in it, right? So the sand is causing these little micro abrasions that over time
chip away enough.
But if you think of what happens when the wind hits a rock, it's gonna bounce off and create these little eddy currents, right? Whereas if rainfall falls on a rock and runs down it, it's not going to spin off like that. So it has to follow the surface the whole way down.
Yep. So
and it's essentially doing weathering the whole way down. And that would create a smooth shape, whereas the wind hitting and then bouncing off and into those eddy currents means it's not going to follow the shape of it the whole way. And so you could end up with
end up getting different stratifications, right, off of the impact.
Right.
So, like, instead of getting the smooth vertical,
wind directions can shift.
You can get it chipping off in different directions and creating different.
Because the wind directions can shift too. So, the wind's going to be hitting it from different directions at different times. And whereas water is only ever going to be coming from above to below, following gravity.
So, by examining the climatic history of the region, Schoch argues that heavy rains necessary to produce observed erosion would have occurred during the Neolithic subluvial period, roughly 7,000 to 3,000 BCE. So that's the range, 7,000 to 3,000.
Because it's
5,000 is right in the middle of that.
So 3,000 is
the earliest,
is when the arid conditions took over.
It basically kind of took over, so you wouldn't see it as much close to that time frame. So that's why they kind of stick it around the 5,000.
What's the official timeline for ancient Egypt? Egyptologists put it at 2,500 BC, right?
That's when they put all of the pyramid, the Sphinx.
Gotcha. And so if the transition to arid happens around 3,000 BC, and he's putting it at 5,000 at least, then that means he's essentially saying it's going to take at least a couple thousand years of rainfall to create that amount of weathering, at least.
Right.
But depending on exactly how much rainfall was happening in that time, maybe you need more or less, probably.
Yeah, and if it's like a flooding, like if it's not meant to be rained on heavily, and it's really in like a, because I don't know how close the Nile would have ran to that, or unless it was, I don't know where. I mean, it would have had to have been rainfall, right?
Right. Well,
but unless there was enough rainfall or a flooding of the Nile so great, but it's pretty far away from the Nile.
Yeah, here's
at
the
least
Nile.
where it's running currently.
Yeah, but if you recall, wasn't the Nile...
There was a delta.
The recent article about the old branch of the Nile that was discovered.
That's right. And it ran
pretty much closer to Giza.
So if that was the case, then maybe that would have flooded, right? If it's a small channel, heavy rainfall, it floods out, and it could be like, imagine like larger amounts of water steadily trickling over the edge, whereas with rainfall, you might expect to see the same type of weathering, but different, like water weathering, but like in a different pattern from it hitting the surface for long periods of time.
Well, and I think you would get
like the ground surface. I mean,
you would get a different erosion pattern,
That's
whether if it's rainfall weathering
directly,
or if it's flooding weathering.
Right.
Because, like a river cuts the rock it flows through as well, but it's going to show a different erosion pattern than rainfall erosion.
Right. That's what I mean. So what, like, because he talked about the vertical nature of it.
Right.
So was it really rainfall, or was it a flooding? Like, was it water coming over the edge of this enclosure as a flooding instead of the rainfall
like a pouring
itself?
in?
Yeah.
I feel like if it flooded that badly, there would be water like flowing in and around. So you'd probably maybe get some different
pooling,
not
like
necessarily
pooling erosion.
all vertical. You'd probably get some like
swirling action,
which might cause some horizontal features.
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't have the pictures on here. We should have gotten some, but
of the enclosure. We can do that quick. Sphinx enclosure. Yeah. So.
So these are pretty clear.
I mean, there are some.
I want to know what the rainfall is. That what rainfall erosion looks like? Because it pools up at the top and then it spills over too.
Well, like a fissure like this, this vertical fissure here, that seems like water pouring over, maybe, or like rainfall coming from the plateau above.
I want to know what kind of does the patterning of like heavy rainfall for long periods of time? Because I guess once the water is heavy enough to like cover the ground, the erosional features would just be the water moving over the ground.
Maybe that's what this horizontal feature is like showing
like
different
water
like
line.
High water marks,
right?
And where like water is kind of moving and
upwards
because maybe the water surface was pooled there.
And that's why these fissures are not exact either, because as the water fills, there's different softnesses and different...
Dude, maybe the original Sphinx vision was like a lion bathing in water, and that's why it's cut out of an enclosure.
Dude, it's like the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
Where it's got a giant pool of water in front of it, or surrounding it.
Just chilling there, taking a bath. That would be so epic looking.
That'd be cool. We should get an AI-generated picture of that for this episode.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, most of this is stuff that Robert Schoch has talked about, on Joe Rogan and other stuff. So it's not a lot new, and I didn't see the end of this talk, and there was like his idea of what likely caused the water, like the massive amounts of like water, and basically the onset of the Younger Dryas, the impact that the Cosmic Research Group is studying to, determine whether it was an impact of a crater or of a comet or something, or asteroid. But his idea that it was a solar event, and like the solar event idea, that's good.
I can get better. I want it to actually be a lion because I like. I like Graham Hancock's theory that that it was originally a lion head because the man head is too small.
That's right. It was repurposed. But yeah, anyway, like he has the idea that, and I know that you had mentioned that George in one of their panel talks was like, "Can we finally agree that it was a comet?" And he's like, "No."
No.
Or what was it?
No, he was saying, he's like, can we call a truce, like within our community of people who are thinking alternate, and maybe we can come to some sort of compromise where maybe the onset is caused by an impact, and the end of the Younger Dryas maybe is caused by a solar event, or vice versa.
He wanted to compromise, but you can't just call it like, oh yeah, that seems right. No, that's not what they do in science. That's not what science is done.
No, that's not how it works.
But yeah, I like Schoch. I think there was more in that video too. Like there's some other resources to find him. Like he's on YouTube. You can find his Secrets of the Sphinx documentary on YouTube, and a lot of his other research. He was on Joe Rogan, so you can watch that episode, and gives you a lot of information on his ideas. And it was a lot of the same stuff that he talked about in the Cosmic Summit, but he's definitely been instrumental to a lot of this ancient civilization talk, right? The lost civilization talk.
Secrets of the Sphinx.
Yeah, check them out.
I'm gonna add that to my playlist.
Yeah, I would love to see Robert Schoch on with like a Graham and Randall, get the whole crew together.
Yeah,
and do like a giant podcast on all of the evidence, all the actual scientific evidence that they have on all this stuff.
That's kind of what I was hoping the panel at the end of the Cosmic Summit was going to be, was kind of like a mini podcast where they're just all kind of talking together.
Yeah.
But
I want Graham to get back into the Cosmic Summit stuff too.
Yeah.
I don't know why Graham is ousted.
I think he just had other things going on.
Oh, okay.
He's a busy man.
It's true.
Maybe he's working.
I do want to see
season 2 of.
That would be cool. Apocalypse.
Ancient Apocalypse.
Ancient Apocalypse. He needs to change the name.
All right, cool. Well, we're close to this next segment, and then we'll come back. I'll cover the talk I listened to, and we'll. I don't know if that'll be a full segment or not, but we'll conclude after that. So here's another Stevie Nader song. This is from his second album, and the song is called Speculate, which is kind of perfect for this podcast.
They've lined up so well so far.
you, I know. I don't speculate, I don't speculate, I don't speculate you. I don't speculate, I don't speculate, I don't speculate you. I don't speculate, I don't speculate, I don't speculate you. I don't speculate, I don't speculate, I don't speculate you.
Welcome back. Did you have enough time to speculate on your opinions of the Sphinx?
I don't speculate.
All right.
Cool. So
who did you cover?
I covered Dr. Joanne Ballard. She's an expert on late glacial wildfires.
Okay. So this is some of the evidence they find is like a proxy, right?
Yeah, this is one of the impact proxies, and this is her sort of study. So she kind of goes over what the Younger Dryas is. She talks about beryllium and carbon spikes. She talks about the Younger Dryas flower. Kind of points out where all the Younger Dryas stuff is. And then she starts talking about like the types of evidences that you use to determine wildfires in the past.
Okay.
So one of those forms of evidence comes from tree ring analysis or dendrochronology, which is a cool word.
I feel like I've heard that before. I've definitely heard that before. Dendrochronology.
Yeah. So she shows this photo here showing an example of like fire scarring inside of tree rings and whatnot.
Is that established as far as that being the cause of those?
Yeah. That's part of what dendrochronologists do. Dendrochronology being the study of tree rings, right?
Burrowed forests. Okay.
She talked about other types of evidence, rocks that are heat treated, turn red. She says there's evidence that you can find in ice cores. There's it like increases the amount of certain elements being embedded into the ice on those layers, and they can search the ice cores and find that evidence.
Is that a black mat layer in the ice?
I don't know, actually. That might be.
Doesn't that what it looks like?
That would be crazy if that's what that was.
It could just be a strap.
Maybe, yeah. I don't really know. She didn't actually
point that out.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably just a strap then.
She talks about melt glass and fused quartz that you can find in sediment. She talks about lake sediments, so charcoal and soot and siliceous aggregates. Siliceous aggregates being like silicon, or silicate, I think, is like a chemical with multiple silicon atoms in it.
Okay.
She talks about these are the different sites. So she came across like the Firestone papers, talking about the Younger Dryas and the impact proxies and the different sites that they found impact proxies at. Mm-hmm. And her, as a wildfire specialist, wanted to go and investigate one of the sites or some of the sites, looking for wildfire evidence. She talks about the types of lakes they're looking into. So one of the lakes she went to is a Kettle Lake, and she talks about what Kettle Lakes are, which is essentially a kettle lake is where if when the glacier is sitting on top of the landmass and it starts receding, you get sediment that drops down from the glacier melting, right? And sometimes that sediment covers up big chunks of ice that will end up still being frozen for quite a while all this sediment is sitting on top. And then when the ice melts, it creates a depression in the earth.
It fills with water.
And then that becomes the
basin of a
lake. Basin of a lake, right?
So it's where a glacier and the land meet that you find these.
Yeah. So it's a particular style or type of lake is these kettle lakes.
But it's on a receding glacier. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
and
cool.
so you find them in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, New York.
So are they finding this evidence at those sites? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah. So this was her going to Wisconsin to the Gainey site where there's a number of kettle lakes surrounding the actual Gainey site where they did the other proxy studies. So.
So these are lakes that were formed when the glacier was on these sites long ago.
So if you recall, the Younger Dryas happened. So the Younger Dryas happened as we're coming out of the Ice Age. Right. So we're coming out of the Ice Age, and all of a sudden something dramatic happened that kicked us back into the depths of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So as we're coming out of the Ice Age, the glaciers are receding, leaving behind these kettle lakes. Mm-hmm. And then the Younger Dryas happens.
And then they get covered up.
So whatever happens in the Younger Dryas, evidence of what happened there ends up getting deposited into the new lake sediment. So she went and did a bunch of coring of lakes, which up here in these areas like Wisconsin, where you get like the lakes will freeze over in the winter. They'll go in the winter so they can set up their heavy drilling equipment on the ice and then core down, cut through the ice and then core down into the lake.
So they're coring when the lakes are frozen to get the core data. Mm-hmm. Is it easier than water? I guess it
is because it makes it easier to set the equipment up.
That's true.
You can kind of cart the equipment out onto the ice. You can set it up so it has a nice solid base. Then you cut a hole through the ice and then you drop your drill down through the water.
Is that what all the lakes in Wisconsin are from? They're all kettle lakes?
I don't know if they all are, but I know there's probably a great amount of them that are kettle lakes.
Okay.
And so she talks about how they actually do the coring. So here's like a little diagram. And so, they drill down to pick up a core column out of the mud at the base of the lake. And they'll go like as far as they can, but then they have to kind of do it in chunks, right? Kind of like when you drill with a hole drill into wood, like you kind of, if you have to drill through like really thick, sometimes you have to drill, take it out, empty it, do it again. So same idea. But what that does is that can cause an issue where the transition from one core to the next gets messed up. Mm-hmm. So what they'll do is they'll take two different cores nearby each other, and they'll just make sure that the transitions are offset at different points.
I see.
So like whatever area gets messed up by the transition of one core to the next core going deeper, in the other core,
it'll have that
you're doing
layer
that at
intact.
A different spot, so that layer will still be intact. So you can use the two to make sure you don't have any gaps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can keep going deeper that way too, right? On any of those breaks.
Right. And
as long as your transitions on both of them are different.
Yeah. And then she kind of talks about why they do lake cores rather than just like sampling the ground itself. And she explains that there's a bunch of disturbances that happen in normal Earth. So you'll get worm burrowing, you'll get animals burrowing, you get freezing and thawing with every season. you get tree roots and different plant roots, and all of that can like disturb and mix the land.
Yeah.
Whereas at the base of a lake, you get this nice,
for the most part,
undisturbed, mostly, sediment that starts building up. And so they like using lake cores for that reason.
Or just ice cores in general too, right?
Yeah. So these are from Michigan near the Gainey site.
Okay.
Here's an example of one of the mud cores. And so they find all sorts of things in there, like seeds and fish fossils. They find diatoms, which are interesting. I ended up Googling, using Perplexity AI to look up what diatoms are. And they're essentially a particular type of single-celled organism that's closely related to algae. And they have these really interesting structures where the cell walls are made out of silicon, but they're see-through, so it's almost like a glass-like exterior they have, and they can make all these crazy geometric shapes.
Whoa.
Yeah, here, I'll find some. Yeah, so look at some of the shapes that these things can make. And there's two main types. There's like these circular types, and then there's these like rectangular types. But they make all these crazy patterns. Then she talks about the process of essentially, so you see here's one of the mud columns, and they'll take samples from, they'll take, pop a syringe in there at multiple spots throughout and take samples and drop them in these different cups. And then they'll throw in like chemicals to absorb all the biological matter and remove that from the sample. And she's essentially looking for carbonaceous matter, like ash, soot type stuff, charcoal.
Which she's able to isolate.
Yeah, they're able to isolate that. There are some things that she's basically looking for, like black matter, but there's other things that she says that are look-alike, so they have to test for all those other things that could be, in order to confirm that it is in fact charcoal.
I see.
So then she shows this chart, which is the findings from Swift Lake sample that they did. And she shows here this spike of, what is it? Yeah, organics and carbonate. Carbonate is what it is. Mm-hmm. So there's a carbon spike here, right at the pink arrow here is the Younger Dryas.
Right.
So you can see this spike. Years. Unfortunately, it was right at one of those core transitions. And at that particular lake, when they were doing the coring, their drilling equipment pooped out on them, and they were only able to do one core and not the second one to catch the transition. So that explains that gap in the data right there.
Okay.
But you can see the spike, and you can see the subsidence of the spike there on the other side.
I assume would be the other side of it. So it could go even higher, right?
It could, or it could be that it maxes there, but it probably, it appears to go rather high.
There's another one for Slack Lake. What's the proxy on that one?
Oop.
Sand
so this line here is charcoal count, and this line is organics. I forget what she said was the relationship between the organics, but she also
the silt or like some kind of like organic thing that like embeds, or like where the carbonate embeds itself in it, and they could still like test it.
Interesting.
Or use some of it maybe.
Yeah. And so then she has a few of these graphs compared to to each other, where she shows how the multiple lakes here. We got Swift Lake, Slack Lake, Big Fish, Lake 16.
All of them show it, huh?
And they all have a spike right in that Younger Dryas range.
That's showing where the Laurentide ice sheet covered the U.S.
This is
during the Ice
extent
Age.
of the Laurentide ice sheet. Then she talks about another type of lake, which is a sinkhole pond, which essentially is like where there's gaps, fractures in the bedrock that end up having earth feed into them, causing like a divot in the land. But then the earths or clays or whatever get into those divots and end up blocking them, like the cracks.
Right.
And then the water can't drain anymore, and so it builds into a pond or a lake.
And then it just gets too heavy, and then it breaks more, and then it becomes even more.
Yeah, so those are called sinkhole ponds. They form in limestone regions, apparently. Okay. So they go out and they do some coring from some of those ponds. And some of those areas, like this one in Tennessee, is in an area where they don't, obviously they don't get the deep winter freeze down that far south. And so it's a lot harder for them to do the drilling there because they have to set it up on water. And yeah, she's talking about how they can see like the evidence of the different types of trees, how you get the alpine trees in certain areas, that the occurrence of them starts to go away as the ice age is coming to an end, and then you get more temperate trees like oaks and whatnot start to come out afterwards.
Interesting.
Yeah. Here's a core from a pond in Alabama. Then she talks about the Siliceous Aggregates, and I found this super interesting. So in the Alabama pond, they're taking cookies off of the core.
Slices, yeah.
They were looking at those, and they were finding she was finding these crystalline microstructures, she called it, inside the core right around the Younger Dryas layer. And so they took a look at the crystals, and they find that there's what's called siliceous aggregates, which is essentially these like silicon crystals that form.
And these are micro, right?
Yeah, they're small.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's amorphous silica bonded with quartz, silt grains, and organic material. She says that the source of the material that forms these crystals is actually from the phytolith in trees. So phytolith.
So it fused with. Yeah. So what's phytolith?
So part of how trees form is, when the roots go down, they're pulling materials out of the earth in order to build structures and their cell walls and stuff. And one of those materials they pull is silicon, and it gets embedded in they pull it out of the roots, they move it up, and they use it to construct the cell walls for like structure and rigidity. And they've done experiments like growing plants in soils that have no silica in the soil, and what they find is that the plants will grow, but they will end up often collapsing under their own weight because they don't have the silica to reinforce their cell wall structures.
Interesting.
But that same material, when exposed to a fire, ends up melting into these crystals. And so it's actually wood ash. When you find these amorphous silica crystals, it's actually evidence that there was wood ash, because it's these trees and that silica structures that are melted down.
Right.
And she talks about how they did a bunch of experimentation where they'll take wood ash and set it up in a lab to try and make man-made siliceous aggregate.
Yeah.
And they're able to do it by mixing. She did it under multiple conditions and like tried to find all the conditions under which the siliceous aggregate crystals can form.
Right.
And what did she say? It was silt. Yeah. What the key ingredient that you need to add to it is silt.
Okay.
So she says that essentially what it's showing is that there is wood ash and then probably high winds that are bringing in these like silt particles to mix in with the wood ash, which is then causing the formation of these aggregates, that crystals that they're finding. And yeah.
So as it's being melted, those things are being combined with it.
Yes.
So that's what's forming the crystal.
Or imagine like a wildfire comes through, right?
Yeah.
And the winds that are, driving that wildfire are also like bringing in silts and stuff from elsewhere, which is then mixing in with the ash, which then over time will condense into these crystals as, sediment keeps building on top of it and whatnot, and enough time goes on, water pours through it and all that. But yeah, they were able to create their own siliceous aggregates by experimenting, like pouring water through.
So I'm curious if we, like that, I guess we probably are synthetic. Most synthetic materials are that way. I was just thinking of like having some kind of like elf armor. Using these as to
that'd be cool.
Like exoskin.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So she says, she summarizes saying that siliceous aggregates appeared at a time of major changes in vegetation in eastern North America, possibly from a widespread forest ashing event or events where they seemed to cluster in the late glacial. Siliceous aggregates form from wood ash, mostly Ca, or she said calcium. I forget the term she used for it, but CaCO3 can serve as another proxy for wildfires. Siliceous aggregates were successfully created in the lab within 3 months. Controlled experiments showed that siliceous aggregates do not form without silt present. So we infer firestorms associated with the wildfire. So they aren't just fires, they're firestorms, meaning like they're like heavy fire and heavy wind.
They're creating like actual like crazy wind firestorms that are just prevalent.
Yeah. She talks about some historic extreme fires and some that even had like witnesses. There was a historic fire in October 8, 1871 in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, which was witnessed by Father Pernin. 12 million acres burned. It was right around the same time as the Chicago fire. Have you heard Randall's talks talking about the Great Chicago Fire and how basically the same day there was multiple crazy wildfire outbreaks around the world?
I've heard people link it to the HARP link wildfires, maybe more recent ones to HARP activity. Anyway.
So, yeah, that's her talk is much more academic, much more scientific, but it's essentially detailing the details of how her contribution to the Comet Research Group, which is in the study of wildfires, and how that sort of study works, which is really interesting stuff. Hard for me to reproduce in detail from hearing the talk, but it's good stuff. So hopefully when these all drop on YouTube, if George Howard said they were going to drop on YouTube, but I'm surprised they're not out yet.
You said you saw some of them on other people's personal YouTube accounts, so maybe try that too.
Yeah, I saw that one in particular, but yeah, the Back to the Future guy.
Oh, right.
Anyway, cool. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So wildfires definitely associated with the Younger Dryas as well.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense too. Like as a something that would happen if there was some sort of impact or even a solar event. If there was some kind of solar event that created fires that could not be put out.
Because I believe what Firestone and all are talking about is the onset of the Younger Dryas, is the time period they're focused on with all the proxies. I think it's still rather mysterious for their group, or they don't specialize in the end of the Younger Dryas per se. Some people have like conjectured that it was also an impact, but maybe an ocean impact causing a greenhouse effect, causing the warming out.
Yeah, because a land impact and an ocean impact have completely different consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't think if the end of the if the beginning of the Younger Dryas, where we go back deep into an ice age, you wouldn't necessarily intuitively, without some sort of theory on an impact, like you wouldn't associate that with wildfires, right? Like why would wildfires coincide with us plunging back into the ice age?
Other than like smoke filling the atmosphere and clouding the land, and it makes it colder.
But then you still have to have
it's more
an
arid
explanation of what caused the fires then at that point too.
Right, but if it was such a solar event would probably, like a massive solar flare hitting somewhere on Earth.
Yeah,
and
I really want to dive into Robert Schoch's solar theory because I want to know the details of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, y'all, I think that's about it. I know it's going to be, I guess we're not that far off. We're pretty close to the 2 hour mark. So we'll call this one here, and we'll be back next week with, maybe some more Cosmic Summit. I know there's some more talks we haven't covered. There's some other topics that I'm like kind of excited to get into.
Yeah, unless something completely crazy drops on any of our other topics we've talked about already.
Right. The world's been nuts lately, so if something else crazy happens, maybe we'll have to cover that too.
Yeah.
But
anyway, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook for our weekly drops. Usually it's Tuesday morning. You can find us on YouTube or Rumble if you're looking for
video content
or any podcast app, basically. I don't know. We haven't gotten any reports on how the rating system is working. So people, if you're out there and you can see our rating, rate it.
And join the conversations and let us know what you think about the different topics we're talking about here.
Yeah, we appreciate Mars Brother for that comment.
Yes.
We love having the conversation with people.
For sure. You can also email us at hosts@dualitycheck.net. You can check for links on every episode on our website, dualitycheck.net/episodes, and then / the episode number. So for this, it'll be /32. And
check out our website, hosts@dualitycheck.net.
The website's just dualitycheck.net.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's our email. I keep getting them. I don't know why. I've been typing in hosts@dualitycheck.net so
to
much.
go to our website?
Just so much.
Right, for our logins.
Yeah, it's in my head.
Sweet. All right, y'all. Hosts out.
Peace.